The government announces new measures to contain the threat of Omicron. Cathay Pacific crew member believed to have infected 2 local residents in a restaurant. And Israel has approved a 4th vaccine dose for the vulnerable.
Good evening and welcome. Hong Kong has reported its first locally transmitted Omicron infections. 2 cases have snapped the city's virus-free streak in the community since October, with the government sounding the alarm over a possible 5th wave of infections.
Doubling down on anti-epidemic efforts, the government will dial up restrictions on unvaccinated Hong Kongers in eateries and public venues such as cinemas. Jackie Lin begins our coverage.
Hong Kong's very first Omicron infections detected in the community also marked the city's first local cases in 3 months. According to authorities, they have likely contracted the virus from one of 4 earlier infected air crew members. The pilot flouted home quarantine rules and dined out in a restaurant. There, he infected his father and a construction worker who dined at another table. That precipitated a raft of toughened anti-epidemic measures.
In the context of Omicron and the severe situation, especially globally, we think it is important for us to exercise and implement the most stringent measures.
Entry to all eateries and regulated premises, including cinemas, gyms, and libraries, will require at least 1 jab. The vaccine requirements will be mandated before February, the Lunar New Year period. The government will also impose a deadline for staff at these public venues to be inoculated.
It is also important for the public to protect themselves by vaccination. And why before Chinese New Year? Because we understand, during the holiday, people will be gathering, people will be, coming together. So it is important for them to protect themselves.
Community vaccination centers will extend service hours starting Saturday. The government says a record number of nearly 20,000 residents got tested for the coronavirus over the past few days after receiving alerts about infection risks from the Leave Home Safe app. Gearing up for a potential onslaught of Omicron cases, authorities will reboot operations of the community treatment facilities at Asia World Expo, with 500 hospital beds set to be made available starting Sunday. At public hospitals, medical staff providing emergency services will have to get COVID screened every day. While the Omicron strain is said to elicit less severe symptoms than earlier variants, it's more transmissible than the Delta variant, with a higher reinfection risk among recovered COVID patients. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
The city's daily total coronavirus cases have soared to 19 today. 2 of them are local cases believed to be connected to a Cathay Pacific crew member. 17 imported cases have been identified, with all of them likely to be carrying the Omicron variant. They involve arrivals from the UK, US, Canada, and the Philippines. 16 others have tested preliminary positive for the virus.
Well, the Omicron-infected Cathay Pacific crew member had earlier visited the Moon Palace restaurant in Kowloon Tong's Festival Walk Mall.
2 patients in the restaurant were confirmed to have caught the virus today, and a government health advisor believes there is an outbreak cluster in the eating establishment. Timothy Lee has that story.
The Moon Palace restaurant has now been temporarily closed, and the Festival Walk Mall has installed temporary testing centers. Citizens who visited the mall after Monday afternoon will have to take COVID-19 tests by tomorrow. The confirmed patients include a 44-year-old Cathay Pacific crew member, his 76-year-old father, and a male construction worker. The crew member was dining with family members at the green table, while the construction worker dined at the purple table, with a distance of about 9 meters. Government advisor Professor David Hui said a cluster has appeared in the restaurant and urged citizens who visited there to get tested quickly. Other sources said the infected crew member, who resided in Discovery Bay, visited a bar in Central 3 days after arriving in the city. Hui said the common practice of removing masks in bars raises the infection risk significantly. and called upon residents to stay home during New Year's Eve. Hui added those who participate in larger events and crowds must remember to wear masks. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Starting at midnight, air cargo crew members must undergo 7 days of quarantine in designated hotels after flying into Hong Kong.
The new government mandate comes after Cathay Pacific crew members violated a 3-day home quarantine arrangement. Sharon Tang has more.
As a measure to fight the pandemic, Cathay Pacific had earlier introduced the so-called closed-loop management. Under the plan, aircrew members on board passenger flights who have worked for 3 weeks in a row must undergo quarantine in hotels in the city for 2 weeks before they enter the community. But as many employees were upset by the plan, the airline later changed the protocols. Aircrew members who were on board passenger flights would return to Hong Kong via cargo flights and would only need to undergo 3 days of quarantine at home. But with more aircrew members infected with Omicron and having sneaked out for meals during their stay-home order, the airline has further tightened the measures. Sources say all crew members who have been in contact with passengers must now undergo at least 7 days of quarantine in the city. The government has today criticized those who have flouted the rules.
They were being irresponsible. So a large number of residents have to be sent to quarantine centers or have to take repeated tests during the New Year holidays. The chief executive made it clear that she would not accept any such violation of the rules. She has demanded the chairman of the Cathay Pacific to conduct a review in person on the cases and to give the public a satisfactory explanation.
Amy, who is a Cathay Pacific flight attendant, said a lot of her colleagues were not ready for the new arrangement. In a statement issued today, the airline noted the actions of individual crew members are extremely disappointing and that disciplinary procedures will be taken. The city's flagship carrier added it's operating all flights with fully vaccinated aircrew only and they are tested frequently. It added the health and well-being of customers and the community remain its top priority. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
Israel has approved a 4th dose of the COVID-19 vaccine for people most vulnerable as it braces for a wave of infections fueled by the Omicron variant. Israel launched trials of a 4th dose earlier this week, administering it to about 150 medical personnel. It was among the first countries to roll out the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine a year ago and began administering boosters in the summer. But it still saw a wave of infections because of the Delta variant, and officials warn of another surge because of Omicron. Still, there is some debate among health professionals about whether a 4th dose is necessary. Israel says it will begin administering the shots immediately to heart transplant patients and others most vulnerable.
Meantime, the number of new COVID cases are continuing to rise in many countries across Europe. England's National Health Service is setting up extra care facilities in a bid to preempt a possible surge of Omicron patients.
Meanwhile, protests against the new pandemic restrictions got underway in Barcelona. In Italy, people rushed to get tested for COVID-19 ahead of New Year's Eve. Daniel Rowell tells us more.
England's National Health Service is building temporary structures at hospitals around the country to prepare for a potential influx of patients suffering with the Omicron variant of COVID-19. Each surge hub will have the capacity to treat around 100 patients. Plans are also in place to create 4,000 extra beds in total, should they be required. Still, concerns have arisen there will be a lack of staff to help run the facilities, as many NHS workers have tested positive for the coronavirus. New daily COVID cases in the UK have risen sharply in recent days, largely fueled by the spread of the Omicron variant. Public health experts have warned the sheer number of infections could cause a spike in hospitalizations and deaths. That's despite early data suggesting that Omicron could be less likely to lead to severe illness than previously discovered strains. Elsewhere, hundreds protested in Barcelona against new pandemic restrictions that have been implemented throughout Spain, such as outdoor mask mandates for those aged over 6 years old. Participants, many not wearing face masks, marched to the city's Arc de Triomphe Square, where an improvised party was held. The demonstration took place despite Spain facing an unprecedented surge in coronavirus cases. According to the country's health ministry, Thursday was the second day in a row when new infections surpassed 100,000. In Italy, thousands of people throughout the nation flocked to get tested for COVID ahead of New Year's Eve. Government and local authorities have banned large public outdoor and indoor events on December 31st due to the threat posed by the Omicron variant. But small-scale private gatherings prohibited last year due to the emergence of the Delta strain may go ahead. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
Well, across the globe, people are ready to bid good riddance to 2021 and wish for fresh hope in 2022.
In many places, New Year's Eve celebrations will be muted because of a second year of a surge in COVID-19 infections, this time driven by the Omicron variant. Alan Booknier reports.
3, 2, 1, Happy New Year!
In New York, rehearsals for the famous New Year's Eve ball drop. After banning revelers from Times Square a year ago, city officials announced plans for a scaled-back celebration with smaller crowds and vaccinations required.
They're going to see a lot of entertainment. Not only are they going to see this Times Square ball, they're going to see Journey, Don't Stop Believin'. We're ready for a good 2022.
In Sydney, where there's also been a rapid spread of cases, people were lined up to get tested ahead of their New Year's plans. The New South Wales Health Minister had a suggestion for a New Year's resolution.
Please don't stand on your dig. If you've told your mates that I'm not going to have it because of whatever, well, now's the time to actually say, actually, you know what, I'm thinking about it. It's a new year, I'm going to change my ways and get a vaccination.
In India, large crowds gathered on the beach in Goa for New Year's Eve, even as the government imposed tougher restrictions to curb the latest spike in infections. Authorities in Goa issued directives to hotels, restaurants, and casinos to only admit guests with vaccination certificates or negative test results. In Rio de Janeiro, the site of Brazil's famous fireworks, tourists flocked to the beaches. After announcing a complete cancellation of all celebrations earlier this month, city officials will now allow the massive fireworks display. The local government, however, still canceled other public celebrations and concerts aimed at reducing crowds. Alan Booknier, TVB News.
Still ahead on tonight's news. U.S. and Russian leaders exchange warnings over Ukraine during a phone call. One of the world's largest trade deals comes into force tomorrow. And to look at the city's celebrations and traffic arrangements on New Year's Eve.
Welcome back to TVB News. U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin exchanged warnings over Ukraine during a phone conversation yesterday.
The two leaders spoke amid growing alarm over Russia's troop buildup near Ukraine, while the Kremlin insists on new guarantees from the U.S. and NATO. The 50-minute call requested by Putin was their second conversation this month. It was described as a serious and substantive discussion, but officials from both sides say the talk did not yield any major breakthroughs. Aides say Biden urged his Russian counterpart to decrease its military buildup near Ukraine, warning that an invasion would result in dire economic consequences for Russia. Putin's foreign affairs advisor, Yuri Ushakov, said further U.S. sanctions would be a colossal mistake that would entail grave consequences. He added that Putin told Biden that Russia would act as the U.S. would if offensive weapons were deployed near American borders. A senior Washington official says Biden told Putin the two powers now face two paths: diplomacy or American deterrence through sanctions. Biden said the route taken will depend on Russia's actions in the period ahead. White House officials also suggested the leaders agreed there are areas the two sides can make meaningful progress, but also differences that might be impossible to resolve. Russia insists on a written commitment that Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO and that the alliance's military equipment will not be positioned in former Soviet states, demands that the Biden administration has rejected. Analysts speculate that Putin is making unrealistic demands in the expectation of a Western rejection that would give him a pretext to invade. Russia denies any intention of launching an invasion. The two leaders did manage to lay groundwork ahead of scheduled talks between senior U.S. and Russian officials next month in Geneva. Those talks will be followed by a meeting of the Russia-NATO Council and negotiations at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, one of the world's largest trade deals, will come into force tomorrow. The RCEP agreement was signed by the 15 participating countries, among them China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. In November 2020, following 8 years of negotiations, the deal will take effect on Saturday, initially in the 10 countries that have submitted instruments of ratification with the ASEAN Secretariat. Under the agreement, more than 90% of merchandise trade between approved members will eventually be subject to zero tariffs. The 15 RCEP member states are home to 2.27 billion people, with a combined gross domestic product of $26 trillion.
President Xi Jinping delivered a New Year address to ring in 2022 earlier this evening. Bidding farewell to 2021, Xi described it as a meaningful year as the country celebrates its centenary and has successfully eradicated poverty this year. It will continue to strive for common prosperity and the reawakening of Chinese culture with strategic endeavors and patience. The country has also been concerned with the stability and prosperity of Hong Kong and Macau. He also stressed the importance of the country to work towards the goal of unification with solidarity. And Hong Kong has prepared a series of countdown and other celebratory events to be held across the city.
MTR trains, as well as some bus and minibus routes, will be enhancing service tonight. Caleb Bloom with details.
Despite facing the risk of an Omicron outbreak, the city is ready to welcome the new year. Over at Lan Kwai Fong, the police have implemented special traffic arrangements to ensure smooth traffic flow and public safety. Multiple countdown events are set to be held tonight. A concert will be held at the Central Harbour Front, with 520 drones to fly over Victoria Harbour to showcase a light show during the countdown. A party will be held at Central Market with performances and fireworks. Over in Causeway Bay, the Jardine Noonday gun, as per tradition, will be fired at midnight. The gun was cleaned this morning for tonight's event. There will also be a bell-ringing ceremony at Po Lim Monastery on Lantau Island. The closed-door event will see the bell toll as a gesture to bless the city. Aside from the Disney Resort Line and Airport Express, all MTR lines have enhanced train services since the afternoon, with the last trains on each line to depart 1 hour later than normal. Bus and minibus services on certain routes will also be enhanced or extended. As for the weather, the observatory is expecting occasionally strong offshore winds at night, with the temperature ranging from 17 to 21 degrees Celsius. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Well, as the city gears up for New Year's Eve, our reporter Sharon Tang is in Lan Kwai Fong tonight. Sharon, as the threat of Omicron hangs over Hong Kong tonight, how much concern is there among people heading out to celebrate tonight?
Hi James, hi Mel. Now as you can see, the atmosphere here is slowly picking up. By that I mean restaurants are actually packed, but the streets are not too crowded just yet. After all, we are still a few hours away from the actual countdown. Now big crowds are expected tonight despite the government warnings and reminders that the public should avoid public gatherings following the Omicron infection in the community. Now we spoke to some folks in the city tonight who are out, and they actually told us that they are not too worried. And restaurant owners also told us that they were actually fully booked 2 weeks ago. And when asked about their feelings and New Year's wishes, they hope for good health and prosperity. Not to our surprise, that's exactly what I wish for as we bring into 2022 as well. And that's all for me for now in Lan Kwai Fong. Happy New Year, guys, and back to you in the studio.
That's the news. Wishing everybody a happy, healthy, and much better 2022.
Bye for now.